I think everybody has watched at least one video about crazy or obscure drugs. And while these videos are interesting, usually if you've seen one, you've seen them all. And typically the entries are rather surface level. Fortunately, this video is different. We're going to cover drugs that are so random and so unknown by the general public that even super niche internet communities don't know about them. Oh yeah, and this list gets crazier as it goes on. Let's begin. Salvinorin B, methoxyethyl ether. If you thought of salvia when you heard salvinorin in the jumbled mess of scientific smart people speak, then you would be correct. This isn't just regular salvia. This video is about drugs you've never heard of, and this stuff is way crazier than regular salvia. In fact, I think a good name for this would be super salia. But in case you're unfamiliar with regular salvia, with regular salvia from every trip report that I've seen, using salvia, and even at that, the bar is so low for salvia that even a good experience is pretty much just not being as traumatized as the majority of people that take it. But Sanor B isn't regular. Salia, this drug is Salia's crackhead cousin, honestly. For all intents and purposes, this drug is probably one of the most cursed compounds ever made, for a variety of reasons. For starters, the National Library of Medicine states that this chemical is among the most potent and selective kappa opioids known, and in this case stronger, is not always better to this day. Only ever been one reliable Salver and B-trip report, and that's simply because even some of the most seasoned psychonauts don't want to touch it lightly. With a ridiculously long half-life. According to sources, Salvinorin B is 5 times more potent than Salvinorin A. Lasts for a duration of 2 to 3 hours, which brings using this drug into the realm of sheer insanity. If you are crazy enough to want to try this drug, you would need to heavily mentally prepare yourself beforehand, because breakthrough drugs like salvia and DMT are known to cause time dilation. It means that your trip could feel longer than it actually is. In real life, time dilation is one of those things that's commonly discussed online, yet nobody really knows how or why it happens. In a post I found on the DMT forum, a user stated, like I lived an entirely different life. In the DMT world, it felt like 10 years or so I even had a family. If that's not crazy enough, another user commented on this post saying this happened to me on salvia. I had absolutely no awareness of this life. I lived a whole lifetime in another life and then zap, I'm in my bedroom. And another user discussing his trip wrote what feels like an eternity only lasted 15 minutes. Keep in mind, this is just regular, which only lasts 5 to 20 minutes, considering Sanor and B is 5 times more potent and lasts about 15 times longer. It's no wonder why so few even dare to try it. So what happened to the person that did take compound? For that, we actually need to look at the research paper. Here had the psychonaut in the study measure his dose in micrograms, which is extremely tiny. An average dose of regular salvia is measured in milligrams, which is obviously much more the psychonaut in the study, which is basically just a fancy name for someone who likes psychedelic, said the following about his experience with Sanor and B. My head was observed to retract, and my face was frozen in a frighteningly blank expression, as if I were having a stroke. My hands adopted a strange pose and waved around very slowly, alternately creepily awkward and graceful. I remembered none of this then, when talking about actually breaking through on the which basically means losing track of your current reality and entering hyperspace. I wasn't actually perceiving any objects in my environment. It was my mind that I was perceiving as a manifestation of the movement of a 5-dimensional object through a 4-dimensional membrane. Whatever that means. Considering this was such a minuscule dose, I can't imagine the trip report someone might come back with if they took a full send level dose. For you guys, there is actually one other trip report on the entire internet. Although it isn't reliable as an actual research paper, it is simply titled, I Cannot Comprehend What Happened. And it's actually written by a career chemist who synthesized the compound himself, and upon taking it, was transported into an entirely different life. In the 1950s, this is his quote. On the experience I fell through, my floor into an endless array of eerie sounds. I eventually reached the bottom and felt my body hit the ground. The creature walked towards me and grabbed me by the neck and said, and it distur. Realized that I was in the 1950s. The trip went from impossible events to me simply existing in a different time. I walked around on the street and found a newspaper on the ground. I could read each and every article, and on the top it read, August 6th, 1953. I didn't know that it wasn't real. It was all I knew I could remember my life. But it wasn't me. It was the life of a person that I was in. 1953. I could remember my childhood years to almost time travel. This one part of this one story doesn't make this compound seem any less terrifying for CMA. Like many of the obscure chemicals on this list, finding information on 4-CMA is not easy. To create an entirely new drug. Basically, research chemicals are the result of scientists crafting random stuff, like they're brewing potions in Minecraft. The thing is, most of these chemicals don't make the cut typically because they either have terrible side effects, or they aren't useful medically, or they did in 2018. 2019 reported detection of 4-CMA in pills. Once again, now you might be curious, why is the slightly pleasant antidepressant on this list? Well, it turns out that this drug is highly neurotoxic to its users in studies done with rats. It was found to permanently reduce serotonin, and in further studies done on it, it was also found that, quote, administration of 4-CMA caused a prolonged reduction in the levels of serotonin in the brain 1 month after injecting a single dose of the drug. In other words, it physically kills your serotonin receptors permanently. Now, to make things worse, there are still vendors that are knowingly selling this toxic chemical with no regard for the general public. This is bad because these drugs can easily end up in a wide variety of recreational pressed pills that are sold on the black market in regard to this. In the research chemicals. Subreddit one user wrote, "Nice, a substance that could fry your brain like only a lifetime of MDMA use could in one city," which I feel is pretty accurate. And it's even been reported that abusing this chemical could leave you with, quote, an irreversible depression that would be like an MD may come down every day for the rest of your life. Although it's been speculating that reaching this state would require multiple large doses over a long period of time if you don't want to take the chance at permanently damaging your serotonin neurons, I would strongly recommend staying away from this drug. I almost want to call 4-CMA super MDMA, but it's really not the case. It's honestly just the worst of both worlds. The upside of MDMA is completely subdued in for CMA, and the downside of MDMA is amplified to such an extreme degree there is absolutely no value in the trade-off. Pyros, no, not the TF. 2-pyropyros is an abbreviated word for the class of drugs known as pyolopon, and they're pretty much crack on crack, if you remember the bath salts epidemic from about a decade ago. Well, pyros are to blame, pretty well known in the fringe drug community as being the most addictive class of chemicals on Earth. And when I say most addictive, I'm talking about 20 times more addictive than crack. These drugs are absolutely insane, and they don't even hold a candle to the mainstream drugs known for their addictiveness. For example, with commonly known drugs, most people actively decide to stop using it before their supply runs out. This is definitely not the case with this stuff. Barely anyone in recorded history has started using a supply of pyros and just stopped halfway through out of sheer willpower in most stories on the internet. People who start a stash of pyros only end their days-long bender because they became full-blown psychotic and ended up in a psych ward, or if they're lucky, started seeing shadow people early on and got scared enough to flush the rest of their supply down the toilet. But this stuff is so addictive that I'm convinced somebody has flushed their stash down the toilet and then immediately gone sewer diving afterwards on a quest to find his precious like Galeem and Lord of the Rings. Because of this, even the most seasoned drug users won't take this stuff because the compulsion to take more is practically impossible to overcome. In hindsight, it's no wonder we had a bath salts zombie epidemic. Just to clarify, bath salts are literally just pyros. Imagine you're trying to quit a chemical that's 50 times more addictive than crack, and every time you make a stop at the gas station for your nightly Twinkies, a scraggly old dude in the back who smells like salami is tempting you to buy it for a couple bucks. The thing about the bath sal epidemic was that whenever authorities finally got around to outline the latest chemical, the drug lords that sold them would just hire some armchair chemist on the internet to look for slightly different chemicals on the dark web. That kind of looked the same. Keep in mind, they wouldn't even know what the side effects would be. So basically, they were pretty much just selling random research chemicals to homeless people as test subjects. Because of this, a lot of people got caught up in bath salts addiction around 2012 because they had no idea how addictive they would be. But that's not even it. The most diabolical aspect of pyros is that they make you extremely horny. I'm not joking, like a 64-hour edge session with no break or sleep until you literally pass out from exhaustion, or get submitted to urgent care. They say that meth can turn you into a gooning degenerate. But this stuff is like meth time 5. To make matters even worse somewhere along the way, armor chemists on the internet somehow figured to conveniently turn this compound into vape juice, which pretty much makes this invention the world's worst jewel. So the next time your mom gets mad at you for your vaping addiction, feel free to remind her that there's some 45-year-old dude with scraggly hair in this basement, vaping super crack and jorking it for 10 days straight. The amount of gooning behavior Piro cause would literally make your average Discord moderator look like a Buddhist monk. Long story short, outside of their extremely addictive qualities, these drugs are well known for turning you into a D1 gooner. Like legitimately the Michael Jordan of gooning. From what I've read, this drug easily makes you the biggest degener in the world. Trust me when I say pyros are one diabolical class of drugs. 5-MeO-DMT. 5-MeO-DMT is basically DMT's mysterious grandfather. If you think the sorcerers we talked about in the medieval video were mysterious, you'll be even more intrigued by this chemical compound. This chemical is sometimes nicknamed the God molecule, and surprisingly unlike other chemicals in this list, this substance is actually naturally occurring. But this isn't found in a mushroom or tree bark, like normal drugs. 5-MeO-DMT is naturally occurring in toad venom, of all things. I mean, talk about hardcore, unlike the more forgiving and consistently spiritual trip brought on by regular DMT. Whether or not 5-MeO-DMT is going to be a glowing spiritual experience or an existential crisis was basically a coin flip. And that's a problem, because if you choose to inhale this stuff, it is reported that this trip could last up to 2 hours, which is 8 times longer than regular DMT's duration of roughly 15 minutes. And unlike most psychedelics in which people usually report pleasant experiences when they use the drug with reverence and respect, MeO-DMT doesn't care how nicely you treat it. And that sucks, because if you have a bad time, you could have a very bad time for up to 2 hours. Additionally, in my armchair, psychologist opinion, I'd wager that a bad trip on 5-MeO-DMT is at least 10 times worse than a bad trip on regular DMT to prove this point. I'm calling upon a popular website known to host trip reports on this website. There's a category for bad trips for context with regular DMT. Some titles of bad trip reports include First Breakthrough Ig Loss and Bad Trip Accelerating the Evil and Ego Death, A Cautionary Tale, Unprepared Liftoff into the Worst Case Scenario, and Too Much for a First Time, which to be honest pretty much sounds like the either took too much or experienced ego death, which is kind of a normie experience with psychedelics now. On the other hand, here are the titles for bad trip reports on 5-MeO-DMT, Existential Horror, Pure Horror, Facing Psychedelic Terror, Unimaginable Deaths of Terror, and I ended up praying to Jesus Christ. Yeah, it's not a super fun way to spend your Sunday afternoon. Honestly, as a word of caution, if you're prone to existential anxiety, I would shy away from reading any bad trip reports altogether. Now, it seems like a common theme in these reports that people actually think that they're about to die, or actually dying while on the drug. Now, I don't know about you, but taking a drug that makes me believe I'm actually dead. And now my only friends are Casper the Ghost, the Grim Reaper, and Harambe totally sounds like a blast. Not one reason for these reoccurring death themes in trips might be that 5-month DMT is one of the only psychedelics that has the actual capability to kill you. You see, usual psychedelics can't kill you unless you do something really dumb. Under the Influence 5. MeO-DMT is different though, because unlike most psychedelics, this drug has caused death in at least 2 cases, with the 3 major causes being, quote, suffocation after vomiting, lung shutting down, and cardiac arrest. One interesting trip report I found about 5-MMT wrote, I cannot emphasize enough how insanely weird, alien, and utterly cosmic this felt like I'd broken some type of rule, and I had entered an entirely different universe of some type. If you ask me, 5 months DMT is nothing to mess with at all. Before we get into the last entry on this list, I want to make 2 quick notes. 1, this video was actually a top 10. Not top 5, but because of time reasons we cut it in half. With that being said, the second part to this video is even crazier than this first part you're currently watching. Due to the nature of this video, it's rather risky for me to post videos like this, so unless you guys really want part 2, I likely won't post it. If you enjoy this video and want to see the next, even more crazy compounds, please tell me you want in the comments. And maybe if this video gets 20,000 likes, we'll do it. So with that being said, let's get to the last entry on this list. Technically, the first half duster. I know what you might be thinking, what on earth do you mean by duster? The nickname your elementary school bully gave you in 4th grade, a brush for dusting furniture, an American indie rock band from San Jose, California, that was formed in 1996. Okay, nobody was thinking that one. No, I mean air duster. Air duster is the one drug that I can't state this clearly enough you never want to use, and the reason is way more insidious than you may think. Duster kills your brain cells, by the way. Air duster is not just compressed air in a can. The reason air duster is actually considered a drug is because it's mostly a refrigerant, not air, and because this gas is heavier than air. When most people are using it, their voice becomes very deep, and my voice gets really loud and sounds like a monster. Basically, when you inhale, the chemical replaces all of the oxygen in your lungs and removes carbon dioxide in the same way that regular air does. All the while, your body is getting tricked into thinking that it's inhaling oxygen because there's no carbon dioxide building up. This causes the user to get hypoxic, which is basically another word for painless brain suffocation. Essentially, duster makes you suffocate without your brain sending you into fight or flight mode, which often causes euphoria as a byproduct. This might sound cool or fun until you realize that every time you get high, you're giving yourself insane amounts of brain damage. This is because your brain can only bear around 2 to 5 minutes of hypoxia before your brain cells die permanently. To make things even worse, usually duster abusers will use this stuff for hours on end or until they pass out. So instead of just minutes of killing their brain cells, they're doing it for hours a day, according to numerous anecdotal sources I've seen across online. This is one of the hardest drugs in the world to quit. I know this sounds ridiculous, but this is a reoccurring theme on this list. For example, in a post titled, "My Story of Air Duster Addiction," one user on Reddit wrote about how addictive this stuff can really be. In this post, he writes about the first time he tried it, quote, "One blast, and I was done for. I felt like I needed to feel this way for the rest of my life. I cannot describe the euphoria." Then, according to his story, he went to rehab, but immediately after he got out, he relapsed, writing, "I got a job that I lost, but I received a paycheck for around $200 and literally went on a ridiculous binge on duster in my car in the Walmart parking lot. I easily huffed over 50 cans in a 48-hour period. I seriously couldn't stop." He ends the story with saying, quote, "This stuff will make a mess of you and will take you down faster than any hard drugs out there. This is not some kiddie drug. Like I've said, I've tried everything and